is the definition of patriotism. We will miss them both dearly, but take solace knowing they are reunited once again and will remain forever in our hearts. That's just some of that statement there coming in from President Biden. Well, we can now speak to Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, who should be joining us now for more reaction on this. And I believe that she is indeed with us. Gina, very good to have you with us as ever. I'd like to begin by getting your thoughts on this day.
Well, it is certainly a somber one and makes me, and I think many Americans, think back to a time about the importance of public service, selfless public service, integrity, and it was what he really stood for. His presidency and the emphasis that he put on human rights stayed with us for many years after he left the presidency. And my own interaction with him, of course, is through the Carter Center and election observing, trying to ensure free and fair elections around the world. And the Carter Center really set the gold standard for many election observers.
And so you're just mentioning there your own personal interaction with him. What was he like? What really stood out to you?
And friendly. I was a fairly junior diplomat at the time when I was posted to the Gaza Strip. And it was the first elections for Palestinians, a really momentous occasion. The embassy had put in a lot of work under my leadership of putting together teams of election observers to fan out around the Gaza Strip. And there were many groups of observers from the European Union and, of course, the Carter Center. So as I was moving from place to place, checking on teams, we came across President Carter and members from the Carter Center who were also observing elections. We were comparing notes, what we'd seen, what the atmosphere was like, the access that people had, the reactions that people had to this first opportunity to vote for a government for Palestinians. And he was just completely down to earth, friendly, asking questions, sharing knowledge, and it was a thrill for me meeting a former president, doing this important work and something that the United States had stood behind for quite a while. We absolutely checked in with the Carter Center around the world as they went around observing elections, making sure that we had their take on how it went as well as what we observed for ourselves.
Ambassador, that is a fascinating experience to have had as a young diplomat. I also want to talk more about President Carter's impact in the Middle East, because significantly he also negotiated the Camp David Accords, didn't he, between Israel and Egypt in 1978?
Absolutely. And I was a young student in Tel Aviv when Sadat came to Israel for the first time. So having that burst there and then seeing it really capped by the efforts of U.S. diplomats to bring peace between these countries and to work with them to start the peace in the Middle East was something that I found inspiring and quite frankly led to my career choice because of what I saw, what American diplomacy can do in the world.
And of course, as we know, no presidency is all smooth sailing. A significant challenge, of course, being the Iran hostage crisis.
Yes, yes. That, again, before I became a diplomat, but many of those who had been held hostage continued in the State Department, continued working in the Middle East, continued their diplomatic efforts to try and resolve the conflicts of the region. But it did, as your earlier guest mentioned, it really did ensure that he was going to be a one-term president. But like your earlier guest mentioned, the impact of his belief, of his stances, carried on far beyond that presidency and even Habitat for Humanity, building houses is something that many Americans admired and take part in.
We are having a little bit of trouble there with the line with Gina, but in the meantime, we can just take a look at some of the reaction and statements that we've got coming in to the news of the passing of Jimmy Carter. And this one that we have just received here, saying Americans owe Jimmy Carter, this is from the US President-elect Donald Trump, Americans owe Jimmy Carter, quote, a debt of gratitude. The challenges that Jimmy faced as president came at a pivotal time for our country, and he did everything in his power to improve the lives of all Americans. That is according to the US President-elect Donald Trump on social media, saying that for that, we all owe him a debt of gratitude. And I believe that our guest, Ambassador Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, is still with us, listening to all of that. Gina, just coming back to you, you were mentioning there some of the domestic agenda of Jimmy Carter and how in some ways he was a man before his time, particularly when it came to things like climate policy, for example, housing policy and so on.
Absolutely.
And in terms of that, you were also saying that when you had the opportunity to meet him as a young man, as a young diplomat yourself, when he was no longer in office, you found him to be someone who was friendly, down to earth. Just tell us more about his demeanor, because he was also known, wasn't he, for a kind of no frills demeanor, steel-willed even. He's been described. We know that his wife, Rosalind, who passed away in November 2023, was often referred to as the steel magnolia. Together, they were something very much a team in the White House.
Yeah, you're calling it absolutely right. No frills, very simple, very humble in his presentation. And I think that's what struck many of us because he was a former president. And anyone who looks at the presidency now, it moves with such pomp and majesty. And a lot of that still accrues to people who have had the position. They continue to have security, for instance. They continue to have an entourage, for instance. But he did not stand on ceremony. He was extremely approachable. It was an opportunity for a young diplomat, and many of us from the embassy, I went to the Gaza Strip on a daily, if not weekly basis, and many from the embassy, it was their first and only chance to get to the Palestinian territory. So to meet and hear his views of how the election was going was an opportunity not to be missed. So very approachable. You got over the this is a former president fairly rapidly as the conversation went on. And I think we probably crossed paths a few times during the course of the day because, of course, the election was all day long. We met up with Yasser Arafat at one point. He hosted a lunch, and so several of the election observer teams were there waiting for results to come in. And, of course, Arafat did have a female opponent at the time. He did win overwhelmingly, and the Carter Center, as well as the U.S. government, judged those elections to be absolutely free and fair. So it was an extraordinary moment, an extraordinary time in international history, in Palestinian history, and just showed the import and impact of what the Carter Center did with regard to election observers and how working with diplomats from around the world could really make a difference in ensuring that people had the right to make their voice known for their choice for leadership.
Ambassador Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley with us here on BBC News. As ever, very good to talk to you. Thank you for sharing your memories on this day.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Well, if you are just joining us, this is the BBC's special coverage following the passing of the